Hey guys, what's up? You're back for another episode of Safe House 2 Presents Mulut Murai, show about what's happened, what's happening, and what will happen in the Malaysian creative arts industry. You're back with me for another weekly episode, and I'll introduce my guests a little bit, but I just wanted to say thanks again for those of you who are supportive of us with financially. Again, with the donations, it really does help us a lot moving through these like MCO times. And as you guys know, most of these non-essential businesses are not allowed to operate, and that includes, I mean, basically just doing this lah. But my guest here also lives quite close
Not far.
to the area, so it's not like any inter-district travel or whatever. And we just got a coffee together. But yeah, so thanks very much for really supporting us. And I mean, I'm feeling it like a lot of like these vaccinations are happening, and generally there's a hopeful, optimistic perspective on the condition of Malaysia and our management of the COVID pandemic. But we'll have to see. So uh, who I have with me today is Chong Yan
Hi.
who is an artist, and I am not so sure if like some of you know or do not know him, but he is an artist in his own right. He didn't want to be called a conceptual or a contemporary artist,
Yeah.
but he recently held an exhibition at the Backroom KL with alongside a booklet or a publication, I guess, to accompany the installation. And it was from that, I mean, that was how I was exposed to it. But I think in general, they kind of like set a certain kind of precedent on art exhibitions and like art interaction in Malaysia, and that kind of like intrigued me a little bit more for me to like really get to know him and bring him on the show. So hello, hi, how are you?
Hello. I'm good.
Um, yeah, so
Same.
like I said, like it really was a different kind of entryway lah, because I think when I went to Berlin to study, there were galleries and exhibitions happening like all the time, and you could just walk across the street and then there would be something going on somewhere. But when it comes to Malaysia, I don't know, just like the people's interaction and the activity of these kind of exhibitions and installations are not so often and just rarely well received. Also, a lot of artists just don't take certain strides of like experimentation and risk to really have some like, you know, something that's really out there and different. Um, what do you think about that, and like how do you think that you've approached the Malaysian industry, the Malaysian art scene?
I think I'm quite new to, I guess, like the Malaysian art industry because I came back, 3 years ago?
Yeah.
And the introduction was quite exciting, I would say, because I feel like it's much more progressive and there's a certain kind of rawness in the art industry in Malaysia
Right.
compared to like, the West where things are very clinical, very well polished, very well curated as well. So yeah, it's quite refreshing, in the beginning and in the start, if you want to throw a fun little exhibition, you get a group of, friends together and
Yeah.
just invade any space you want. And like, yeah, this it's like, it's very kind of bacteria invading like
Free
a
for
space. Yeah,
all.
free for all, like just go and
Yeah.
get a group together and make something fun. And, it's very experiment. I guess like it's like a fun experimentation, but
Yeah.
in the same time, there's not a lot of funding for things like that too.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a certain struggle in artists like wanting to be progressive and want to be more experimentation.
Yeah, I mean that's a cool perspective. I didn't really think about it like that. I think more about just like the way that I came into it is a more regressive
Yeah.
kind of picture where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you aren't allowed to do this, and people are not gonna reciprocate the kind of energy that you want within
Yeah.
the community. But it's also quite nice. I had this talk with a couple artists, I mean musicians, a couple days ago, and he was like, they were like, Fahan, what do you think about Malaysian, artistic identity? And one of them was just like, oh, I guess like a big characteristic of Malaysia is that we are like Rojak.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think it goes a bit in line with what you said just now, that there really isn't boundaries
There's no
or
boundary.
structure.
There's no rules as well, towards like anything. And the good thing about Malaysia is people can be super rebellious towards things. You want to set a fire indoor, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
You want to make it rain indoor, yeah, go ahead. You don't have any like rules or boundaries or paperwork to fill out for things like that, right? Like,
Yeah, that's funny lah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's more about like of a safety
yeah,
protocol. and
safety.
shit.
That's one thing. It's very sort of I guess it's that identity of Malaysia. We don't hold an identity, but like you know, it's very community kind of driven, like
You think
identity.
you
and-
would say it's
yeah,
community
the
driven.
best art show I've seen around like KL or like even Malaysia in general are always like a group of like, you know, creative people getting together, you know, no
Yeah.
matter what background you're from, you know, get together, make something fun and just experiment and just throw something quite avant-garde and quite experimentation.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you think that the approach of it is like a little like that way as well? Like completely,
Yeah.
you know, you would assume in the West they'd have some sort kind of like backing or foundation
Yeah,
of what
there's
the
so
art's
much
supposed to
hierarchy,
be.
man. There's so
Yeah.
much hierarchy. You wanna get an art, you know, into a gallery space. Like there's so much rule and regulation for you to do, you know, to be able to get to, you know, to show your artwork
yeah.
or to even share, right? Like it's you need to work with the curator. Everything should be super well polished, super well curated. That's what I realized.
I mean, I guess like we're talking more about these like visual art. I mean, saying where you're in these galleries and spaces, they kind of already have a template on how things are supposed to be, like any other, you know, profession. There needs to be like a step-by-step process. But in Malaysia, because we also don't have it, it's kind of easier for us to
I guess there's a certain beauty in that, you know, without that rule and without that regulation and without that kind of like, you know, the kind of platform that you need to climb to get to a certain place, right? So you make out your own rule and you pretty much like, you know, find your own path to things, right?
Yeah. How has it been like generally? Were you making art back
So
over there?
back then I was like very much stuck in the bubble of the architecture world, right? So I've been, you know, what I do is I world build. You know, I like the idea of like me felt like narrative driven art and things like that. Like instead of building a building, I built worlds as an architect or digital architect. So from that, you know, coming back to Malaysia, that's when I first got introduced to the world of art, I would say. You know, just recontextualize like an architecture project into an art world, right? And finding meaning behind of that, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so back then you weren't really like exposed to becoming like as an artist.
No, I was very much in, you know, student type corporate guy.
Well, and then so you come here and then you're a little bit more
more
flexible
exactly,
and loose with like who you are and what you do.
So it might be, or it's maybe the environment as well, you know, like how coming back to Malaysia, you can hold conversation anywhere you want. Things are very flexible, you know. It's very kind of like, I guess I have a certain optimistic, like, you know, take towards where Malaysia art or creative industry is going to go into.
Yeah.
Because we are at the start of something, I would say.
You know what that is?
Not sure what it is yet, but I can say like 10 years ago, community space doesn't exist right around. Like, you know, right now, I'm sitting in one right now.
Yeah.
And places like that
that's
don't
also,
used to be
like,
around.
maybe we can put a pin onto that, like your experiences on whatever the art community or the industry 10 years ago. I mean, I definitely wasn't doing much 10 years ago. But yeah, so they kind of like get that recontextualization of from that architect profession into, you know, applying things into the, you know, the art world. You're saying that the Malaysian kind of attitude and characteristic push you to be able to explore these avenues?
Yeah, totally. I think this is, you know, what I like about Malaysia is this, right? You want to find out something, you know, you want to find out where an exhibition is. It's always through a word of mouth, you know, it's something quite intimate, right? Like you want to go to a creative space. Yeah, you catch up with some friends and, you know, you just hang out and just start listening to stories about what's cool and where to go to next, you know, what exhibition is coming up, you know, things like that. This is what I guess is quite different than elsewhere, you know, like spaces are popping up anywhere or everywhere, you know, and like I say, you know, community driven sort of approach towards art, right? And as well, like, you know, giving like 10 years ago, like I would say like there's no much of there's not much of this kind of creative platform around, you know, in terms of if you want to kind of express your music, right? Like what do you do? Like, you know, there's no community space around or creative space around.
I mean, I guess. I mean, I just want to share like a little personal experience when.
Like for example, how did you start this place and?
That's a combination of a lot of things. But when my ex-girlfriend who was, we met in Berlin and she's an American and then she came here to visit me. She was like, Fahan, a lot of your friends have businesses.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking like, what do you mean? And like some of them own cafes, some of them like own a clothing brand.
Yeah.
A lot of people, a lot of your friends have like their own startup businesses. And I was just thinking about it. You're right. Like in Berlin,
Yeah.
almost very rarely that do I meet people who like start their own thing.
Yeah.
And she was saying that back in America, like most of her friends don't have actual businesses or anything like that. So I was just thinking like, oh yeah, maybe this is our approach, kind of like to start up your thing by yourself, because there is no
there's no
limitation to it. It's like free real estate. Like you can really just start something new, and no one's going to like heavily compete with you, so that like you don't have that space.
Yeah.
So really, if you open a new venue or any community platform, there's ample of space for you to be around.
Yeah.
And that kind of like definitely how I started out with Safe House, me and my partners, because I mean we've been throwing events for a while already, and like more and more we've just had a limitation of where do we throw our parties.
Yeah.
It's like, oh
that
fuck,
desire,
another club. Like we don't want another like these like really posh kind of clubs where you have to wear shoes and a shirt and shit. So we're just like we're growing. There's a very limited amount of spaces where we really can just do things the way that we want to do things. So why not? Like it's a risk, yeah, definitely, but why not? Like we're all doing it in our spare time. We're not really like paying so much full-time attention into it, but so far it's running as it should. And I think definitely can see that a lot of these kinds of spaces will hopefully open after this pandemic. Again, like because I think that's like the way that I would like to see it, is like, why not do all these things? Why not just have your group of friends and then just throw an exhibition and do a publication alongside? To me, when I saw your stuff, it's like, wow, this guy put in so much effort and money into it. Then it's nice and refreshing to see, because it's like, I don't think that, I don't know, it's not, you didn't approach it as like a business project.
No.
Right? There's no like returns financially and investment.
Well, culturally, I guess, like investment into the culture
exactly.
and art aspect of
which
it,
is the nice part, like the way when I see like certain people do exhibitions, it's more like how can we promote our new shoe, for example, like these kinds of corporate approaches to art and creative world. So like how do you manage your actual time as an architect and with this whole new venture of yours as an artist?
I think on average I spend like 3 days a week on my corporate architecture work, and the other the rest of the week I jump into art kind of creation.
Wow, really? Like almost how?
So it's a kind of nice balance, But one thing I realized though, like in art, being an artist in Malaysia, like, I coined the term, there's always kind of this term that says like you're a struggling artist. And I do understand why, There's kind of a couple platform from what I experienced over the past, I guess, 3 years in arts, right? So one thing is you get signed to, I guess, a very kind of white cube-esque gallery, and then you kind of drop into this position where you want to produce something that sells, because you're in the gallery system, right? Gallery will take 30 to 50% of like what the artwork is being sold for, and naturally grow into producing art that would sell, right? Either you produce a canvas drawing that's quite like surrealistic, or you do like a kind of political struggle, like narration behind of the canvas drawing. And like it's kind of sad as well, like well, not sad, like I guess that's just business, right? But no right or wrong.
That is the reality.
That's the reality.
It's a bit contrived, I think. Like you're right. I don't think a lot of people really have put that the term the white cube term, because I think when you say gallery, it's hard for people to kind of dissociate a gallery and the white cube, because you kind of assume that it has to be like that. And there's no other way for a gallery to be taken in form of like any other way. But that white cube is more just like the most efficient or the most economically practical way for you to have that kind of sale transaction of the artwork.
But I think that's also quite I guess an old model, I would say, of a gallery, or how you will experience an art, right? I don't want to walk into a space that's so intimidating and people trying to sell me things. You know? I want to go more into a community-driven sort of art center or art space, to spark conversation and throw around conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, in I guess in a kind of like white cube setting, like most of the time, like people I hold conversation with I guess a certain curator or like a curator on behalf of the artist, presenting on behalf
Right,
of the
yeah.
artist, and that's a bit, I guess, like different to how I would like to experience art.
Yeah. How would you like the artist directly communicates
Yeah,
with the
yeah. I think
with
that's
the
one thing, right?
right.
That's why there's a certain kind of like intimidation in that also, like
Yeah.
because a white cube, it's always viewed as a very kind of posh ass kind of place.
Yeah.
Like you walk in, you have bright lights, you have like super cool aircon.
Yeah.
You walk up
You're right.
the really kind of narrow
You're
staircase.
definitely
Yeah, but the environment's created around like people to collect things, right? It's like
yeah,
how
exactly.
how fashion is as well, luxury fashion, right? You try to create that sort of intimidation and like the limited, quantity.
Exclusivity.
Yeah, exclusivity,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty much. So yeah, the other sort of art that you see elsewhere don't fully exist in Malaysia yet, I would say.
Yeah.
Other than I would say the back room. The back room is quite fun and not too intimidating, but yeah, I guess environment of how people like absorb or like
Yeah.
art, it's different here than elsewhere.
I mean,
too.
this is why I liked. For me, this is more of an interesting question, lah. Than I feel like a lot of maybe curators or even gallery owners don't really question the presentation of art in galleries this critically, because they kind of it's kind of a given that these are the kind of steps that you have to take, or this is kind of the presentation in which art or gallery should be. But it's nice to see that you have you have this perspective onto it. I guess I don't know if it's you as an architect and you kind of questioning how the space relates to the people that come into it. But to me personally, like it's limiting. How do I word this? The space itself and the way that it's created. If it's bound to certain rules and what it's supposed to be, it also creates boundaries for the people interacting with it.
That's true.
It will stay as an intimidating space if you don't critically see how you can improve it, and then obviously people will open up or not.
I guess that's one thing people don't question a lot, the identity of the space, right?
People don't.
Yeah. And the environment can actually attract different sort of audience and crowd as well, you know? Like, for example, Safe House is super cozy, like, yeah. It's like, it's there's this like thing about it. People don't talk about like how oily the doorknob is next to the kitchen, right? Like this is what I mean. Like it can be applied to a lot of gallery space as well, where I think maybe like to be able to push for art forward, like we need a more like institutional based like gallery space that's more kind of I guess open.
You would say that's the
like
the way.
like MoMA, the Tate, and things like that.
I've never been to those places. I wouldn't even be able to say.
Super casual. You just walk in, like one thing I don't see a lot, but it always gives me a lot of joy when I see a family bringing their kids, into a gallery space. Like, that's like, one day we'll get there.
Because you don't want it to be exclusive. I think the way the things that we're kind of alluding to is that we don't want art to be exclusive anymore. I mean, we've made that transition. I mean, the world, has made that transition during the pop art of Andy Warhols and whatnot, just to like remove the commercialization of art and just making it for all. Everyone can make art and everyone is an artist. Why do we still have places that's so exclusive? And number two is that Malaysia doesn't even have a fully refined fine arts system. Like we don't buy. I don't know how much does a painting go up to in Malaysia. It's not so prestigious anyway.
Well, you'll be surprised. Painting goes up to like 500.
Okay,
like
but not like not like ridiculous levels, not so like upper class elite type of activity. So why do we limit ourselves to just having this really exclusive kind of character? Does it like is it something that we want to keep exclusive and we want to keep as something that we want to limit the amount of people that can understand art?
Yeah.
For me, I don't think that that is a healthy way
Yeah.
of approaching things. I talked earlier also in a different podcast, a different episode, that like I see a lot of people interacting with art by just at exhibitions, simply by just taking pictures for Instagram now, creating,
Yeah.
putting these like installations as like backdrops to their
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
selfies and whatnot. And I don't want to say that that's like the wrong way to approach things, but it's definitely in a way where people don't fully understand how to approach it. And I think it's precisely because we've been approaching it like it's such a white cube concept. And then we've never really explored other avenues into how everyday people can interact with it.
Yeah,
That's
you're
why
right.
people just go up and
Yeah,
then they're
it's,
like,
you're talking about what, like the 5 to 10% of Malaysia that will actually step in the gallery. But what
Oh,
about
yeah.
the other, like, 90%? Like
yeah,
the
I mean,
people
I can't even say.
that spend their weekend in shopping malls. How do you change the mindset of that? How do
Yeah,
you make?
I mean, you do have those like
Yeah.
like those quirky little exhibition dekat
Yeah,
tengah-tengah the
yeah,
mall,
yeah.
and then people just don't really cannot comprehend how to deal with it. I don't know
Yeah.
what to say about those things, but maybe we can start with saying, okay, maybe art shouldn't be a white cube.
Yeah.
Maybe art shouldn't just be commodified to that degree,
Yeah.
and then given a different I don't know, environment for you to interact and understand it.
Yeah, totally.
I
But
don't know.
yeah, no matter what, like it is art or creative and things like that, I feel like that's development though, at least, that's
Yeah,
what I witnessed, like coming back, like, wow, that's amazing where we're moving into, like,
Yeah. Wait, how
Yeah.
long have you been back for?
what, 3 years now?
Right.
Yeah, 3 years. Yeah.
And throughout that 3 years experience, you would say that like
Yeah.
you've seen.
Yeah, I've seen like a really good change. You have places like Rex KL, which is an amazing place. It reminds me of like Berghain a bit. Yeah, like
I don't
crazy
know
party.
I
Yeah.
do not know.
But you
about
know,
that.
when things open up again, like Renaissance gonna come back in, Roaring Twenties.
But-
Like people are like throwing crazy parties, right?
Yeah, but to me, like I think that's the biggest difference, lah. Like
Yeah.
there's such a heavy focus on commercializing and making
Yeah.
things branded
But
and
yes, that's one thing. Commercializing, I'm not super against that, because for space to run, it need to be somewhat financially viable,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
You know.
yeah.
So if that could happen, in the same time they still care about the community and care about the programming and the events and
Yeah.
like the identity of the space, then yeah, I guess that's how things.
Yeah,
can
not gonna
function.
blame you if you take an approach to, at the end of the day, do something back.
Yeah.
For me, it's more about like once you do commercialize, it's hard to go
Yeah.
out of that.
you're
You're
right.
like, oh fuck, I'm actually making money,
Yeah.
and this is good money.
Yeah.
Coming out of that it takes discipline. It takes actual care into
Yeah.
the community and the industry.
Yeah. I guess it's quite different, because I would say in Malaysia we don't have that much of a funding, in arts and creative, like from the top, right? So compared to like other countries, like even Singapore, for a start, like they have a huge budget and funding for things like that. So in Malaysia, for
You're talking about the government,
government, or like the Ministry of Arts and Culture.
right?
So for Malaysia, when a creative space kind of pop out, we always have the idea about how do you make it financially viable, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why a lot of the space around have to be a mix of both, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that is a legitimate point. I mean the
Yeah.
way that I approach things
Yeah.
is definitely how do you make money but not commercialize too much.
Yeah.
Like how do you naturally grow from a grassroots level to have people spend money in your space without having to totally put a brand onto things,
Yeah,
like
understood.
stampal the sticker or marketing or whatever, and just
Yeah.
have that simple kind of enjoyment and consumption of art
Yeah.
that doesn't really need to have it on a bookshelf, not on a bookshelf, I don't know, like a kedai where you can say, okay, this is. I'm trying very hard to like not like be mean about
Yeah.
other places, but to make it so pretty and aesthetically pleasing, and just it becomes devoid of the actual artness openness for me, once you businessify things so much.
Yeah.
I think there are different methods in which people can approach things that to be financially viable, that doesn't need to go to the straight up commodification and commercialization of the space or whatever. I don't know, because there are a lot of examples that we've talked on throughout the podcast like extensively. Like contohnya, have you been to Good Vibes Festival?
Good Vibes, no. I did
It's a
not, but I
music
know about
festival
it,
in Genting.
Genting, yeah. That one.
It's a music festival, but it's like 50% music. The other 50% is like H&M booths and FMB, and it's like it's not. There's not just a music festival. It's a bunch of different things that they need like sponsors to be able to run things.
What's wrong with that though? Like, what's wrong with that sort of model when I guess like because on one hand, for Good Wise to happen, they need to get that sort of like sponsorship to come in to throw the event, and on the other hand, so it's like a win-win, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, sure, but I don't think there is anything wrong for becoming a actual successful company in that sense, but I do feel like the development of
community,
of the arts and just public education and understanding of arts. That's why I say like it starts off with the arts interaction. How do we really value the art itself? Do we want to go to Good Vibes because it's a nice little 3-day vacation that we like save up once a year for, or do we want to go there because we want to see the artist?
Honestly,
that's more of like my question and perspective. Like, how do we interact with it? And once you put all the other brands and shit onto it, it becomes
but I guess it's very kind of a capitalist kind of society where we are trying to commercialize like entertainment, right? When entertainment can be free, right? Like that's the thing.
That's why I was just like when you compared Rex to Berkheim, I think they were like the total opposites. Honestly,
I guess like if you dig into the system about how they run,
yeah, exactly. Because I was in Berlin and they don't allow you to take pictures in Berkheim, for example. That's like the main thing about it. You cannot take pictures in it. It's supposed to be like fun and exclusive and you wait like 3-4 hours outside the line and stuff and you get rejected just because the guy, I don't know, some weird, cultural stigma about the actual space and the your ability to enjoy the art. But in comparison, Rex, would like thrive off of pictures and social media engagement and interactions and just marketing in general, as much as you can, because that attracts the most amount of people. One side is like you can garner like a reputation, cultural, reputation, and the other side is more about like how can you commodify and get as much sales during that month, for example. It's totally, I think the way that they approach things are different, and the interactions with the people there with it is also different.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, nothing wrong. I don't.
There's no right or wrong. So like what I do love about all the art spaces around or creative spaces around, they all have a certain identity at the time being. Like you look at Zhongshan, it's very kind of like lifestyle, graphic driven, sort of like crowd. People want to go there for like Tommy the Baker. Have good food. Good coffee. Like intimate sort of like exhibition. You come to Safe House, it's very musically driven. Crazy parties and like people smashing beer bottles on the ground. I imagine that to happen here. And like and then you go to Rex, which is more like like a huge theatrical sort of like environment where you can throw like massive party. You have like the cool cute little like market downstairs and bookshop upstairs, and then you go to Gongsi KL, which is I guess like looks like a abandoned factory where people like experiment with body movement and things like that, right? And a couple more places. So what I like about all this is like every creative spaces at the time being has molded their own identity. Then there's kind of like diversity in it, right? So on the weekend I don't need to, it's not boring at least, like so there are no right or wrong, and we can go to like other places as well and enjoy what each places have to offer,
which is a cool way to really look at it. I think like it's definitely refreshing. I don't know. I forgot. Maybe you told me your age or what, but I have this view that like certain people once they reach like around 30s and stuff, they become completely jaded with like the arts industry. That you just like, oh, I can't really express myself. I don't make money from it. It's hard to be sustainable.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you can say, okay, you just didn't think about the financial viability of it.
Yeah.
And that could go a lot of ways. Like people can say that, oh, it's selling your soul, but you can also say it's just basically maintaining that livelihood of your your provision towards the creative community.
Yeah.
You like for us, like we need to run in a financially viable way. That's why we have a proper Quasi Cafe right now. Like we didn't intend to do food ever up until the pandemic, and it's just like the options were close down or find ways for us to run legally during the MCO regulations, which is, do you want Safe House to close down or not? That's just simply put.
Understood.
So we need to consider financial viability, and I think there's a big risk for galleries, for example, if they don't approach the similar methods and the similar, steps into becoming the white cube or whatever. It might limit them from becoming.
Yeah. I guess spaces around this, even as an artist, like we kind of need to find
middle ground.
So on one hand, you find a way to, I guess, be financially viable, and then the art or creative on the side. I wouldn't say on the side, but it's pretty much your life. It's like you brushing your teeth every day, right? You have to do it, right?
Right.
So in Malaysia, it's hard to think of like expression and creativity as a kind of like money making subject, unless you go on the road of the white cube. You get to like 50 years old. You get internationally known, and
It's too. It's like that kind of like that movie kind of dream, just to like make it out as like an artist, renowned. Like how many percentage of people actually make it out like that?
No, but it's this is what I do enjoy. Malaysian. I've seen a lot of Malaysian artists. They're doing amazing work, and they're not even questioning about whether they need to earn money or not. That's what it is all about. It's about the pure passion in something. I really admire that so much.
Yeah, and it does hit a block though. I feel for some certain people, definitely.
But okay, hit a block. But in the same time, it's like you have to do it. It's like even though, like for example, I don't make a single money doing art. I'm a struggling artist, right? Like
in that sense,
yeah. In that sense, I'm a struggling artist. I lose money every time I throw an exhibition or I share my things, right? But in the same time, I know that I have to do it. I have to do it to keep myself creatively sane, I would say.
But how do you? What would you advise people who? Fully commit to it though. Because you do have a job, right?
I do have a job.
That is more just like the livelihood of yourself,
my bread and butter.
Your bread and butter. That's how you kind of keep yourself fed.
Yeah.
Do you recommend people just fully committing to art in Malaysia? For me, I've countless of times said no.
Yeah. it's I guess that's also like even me personally as an artist, there's a dream and desire to be financially viable, just purely doing art, right? Like just like enjoying what I love doing. But realistically, it's not. Yeah, it's not. It's plausible, but it's gonna be a tough journey, right? So I can't really give advice. Even I'm me myself. Like I'm kind of on the limbo zone of like being in the corporate and being in arts as well. But yeah. So
I feel like everyone's I've talked to.
Yeah. So it's like a nice balance. So like in the corporate world, I earn a bit of money. The money will flow to my art, expression of my art, and then like blah 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 blah, and then time just fly by like that. And the positive side, I guess I get more of a intrinsic sort of like, I don't know, like an emotional sort of like a happiness, I would say, like of doing it.
Fulfillment.
Yeah, fulfillment and
for
happiness.
Sure. That's what artists want.
Value, that's what we give like a paper like fiat currency value, right? But for me, like just happiness is like a form of value. So if I can kind of flow between the both worlds and find happiness in it, I think that's good enough for me.
What do you see? Like going back to like the first thing, you said that you're like optimistic for what it could be, and it's just because it's such a free for all kind of environment now for art and artists in Malaysia because there's no rules and anything
Yeah.
like that. Or do you see any kind of progression or growth to become a certain thing, like in a different way than what it is around the world?
Mm.
For me, like
Yeah.
a big example I could use is with Singapore.
Mhm.
Like I feel Singapore has definitely taken the same kind of approaches as the
Yeah.
West.
Mhm.
Definitely, I don't know if you feel the same, but I feel like people in Singapore definitely feel like it's not free for all and it's not
Yeah,
Rojak.
It's very clinical and curated. Yeah.
So in Malaysia, I feel like there is a huge stark difference.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
yeah, do you think that we can compare ourselves to Singapore in a way?
No, I think Malaysia sits by ourselves. It will slowly grow into its own art or creative identity. It's very unique. You have like the mudroom pit. Like that don't exist elsewhere. You have like there's a lot of subculture that exists only in the context of Malaysia, and that sort of creativity that you don't see elsewhere, right? Even the identity or safe house, it's very hard to see it, in the West or anywhere around Southeast Asia, I would say. So yeah, like, and right now where the world sits, I think more and more like people are looking towards the East, right, or Southeast Asia in general to
Yeah.
kind of pick up on like the creative industry, music, art,
Southeast
whatever it is,
Asia?
or
You would say
entertainment. Yeah, totally.
I did meet someone
Yeah.
like a couple years ago who was from Berlin, and he was on a flight. I talked to him in the airport, and he was on a flight to go to Vietnam. And I was asking what he does, and he said he does bio art,
Bio art,
which is like making art out of like biology,
Yeah, that's
like
cool. Yeah.
plants and shit like that. And he was explaining to me, and I was just like, I mean, number one, I never heard of bio art. Number two, you're doing that in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Like that is so like out of all places, I thought they would experiment more and like on the fringes, on the forefront of art experimentation
Yeah.
in Berlin. But he was like, no, Vietnam is like heavy onto that shit. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow. This is quite interesting to see that like Southeast Asia is also having their strides of their own within the arts world.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I don't know. I wouldn't say that people are really looking into Southeast Asia.
I'm sure people
I don't know
are.
lah.
Like how, I don't know, like just,
Would you say that?
I guess I'm quite optimistic. I'm always been like that, you know.
You think people are tired of Japan and Korea?
That's like, okay,
Shanghai
like for
and-
example, one thing I realized, like there's culturally, like in Southeast Asia or even down to Malaysia, it's so deep and there's so much thing to be, unravel, and there's so much things to explore, right? Like dimensions, like we talk about the idea of myth, narration, spirits and things like that, right? And we treat it like a way of life even, like, and every culture has something different, like a kind of like tradition, I would say.
that can be incorporated.
Yeah. People talk about like ghosts and things like that,
Yeah.
but this kind of thing, people would think you're crazy elsewhere,
The way I see that,
Yeah.
you don't really believe that like all converge into one.
Yeah.
You don't see it that way. I mean, you can see a lot, even like with buildings and kind
Buildings,
of the
yeah.
globalization of things. It kind of, at the end of the day, ends up looking relatively
something, yeah.
homogenous throughout the world.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the glass buildings. I'm just using
Architecture, yeah.
kind of references, but our houses dulu macam tu, right? Like a lot of Asian, it's like that.
Minangkabau and,
And now most of our skyscrapers all look like glass skyscrapers. Like there's not much identity put into it.
Well, architecturally, yes. Like it's a very kind of global identity, I guess. Like because colonization happened and we kind of grow into that. But
You would say
there's still a certain element of like like diversity in that as well. I would say like kampong exists here.
are very.
How like this is one other subject I realized that Malaysian don't, well, not Malaysian, like even for me, like we don't think a lot about. It's like, how do you preserve the identity that makes us who we are as Malaysian,
Yeah.
not about creating new identities as Malaysian, but the existing identity, like how do we preserve that culture and tradition, but still modernize it instead of creating a whole new identity by ourselves,
How'd you answer that?
I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. I have no clue.
It's nice. It's
I
nice
guess
to think about it though.
It's.
I would like to. It's like a romantic
Yeah.
way to look about it.
Yeah. Look into like I guess like anthropology of Malaysia, or like the cultures of Malaysia and how yeah, how
One thing I've been bitching about recently is that we don't have a understanding of aesthetics.
yeah,
We no concept of Malaysians have no concept of aesthetic.
Yeah.
I mean, it may be surface level, but like not an understanding of why things look this or feel or appear to be certain way. You know, and I was talking like to the people I was talking about recently.
Mm.
Like in Europe, they or certain cities, I don't know, they kind of want to preserve the architecture style. These buildings, even though they're like built by different developers or whatever, generally the area needs to look a certain way. Or for even in when I went to Marrakesh in Morocco, it's the red city. So they already have an understanding that like they want the buildings and the city to look red because they have that kind of appreciation for what things should look like. I was watching this video about even in London, you need to have from all across the city or something like that, where you need to be able to see
St. Paul, is it?
something
yeah,
a cathedral.
Yeah, that's
is
quite
it?
interesting. Yeah.
So that
The
around
airspace,
around the city, you need to be able to stand at certain points of the city, and there should not be any buildings or anything in the way of your view of that building.
Yeah. That's
And
true.
it's fucking insane.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my god, you guys care about this view?
Yeah.
I mean, again, aesthetic of your the cityscape to that degree.
Yeah.
And that's why in Malaysia, when you like have that reflection, we don't have any of that. We don't have a conception of aesthetics.
Yeah. But also like, aesthetic and things like that, it requires exposure. You can't train people how to like, the taste preferencing, right? We can't train people how to like develop a certain like identity and taste. We need exposure, right?
Education.
Yeah, education, exposure, and like
Right.
things like that. So yeah, like the more exposure we have to it, the more like it develops in us, this idea of like preferencing and taste. And yeah, think about it's cool like how like like everywhere you stand you can see St. Paul, right? Think about that. Everywhere you stand in Malaysia you can see, I don't know, like the
Doesn't matter as long as you
Merdeka
put,
Square or something.
it's nice
Yeah.
if you can at least have this
Yeah.
kind of priority that trumps everything else: development, capitalism,
Yeah,
blah blah
yeah,
blah
yeah,
blah
yeah.
blah blah.
That's a really beautiful and
You know?
poetic
It's
concept,
just
yeah.
we as a people care about. They
Yeah.
do this in Switzerland or something as well. Like they don't like this big building because they didn't. I read this. A city in Switzerland didn't like the fact that restaurants were putting tables and chairs outside of the restaurant because it ruins the cityscape, the view of the city. That kind of like appreciation of like that to that
But
degree,
Yeah.
it's for me it's nice to see, like that you give a fuck about things.
True on one hand, yeah, like we Malaysia, I think for a start, we can't really compare Malaysia to elsewhere as well, because there's something super unique about Malaysia,
Right.
Mamak culture, you want to put the table outside, put it out,
Yeah.
like there's
Yeah,
a certain freedom in that.
exactly.
Like
So
I love what that sort of like, because I guess like there's multiracial kind of country as well. Everyone has a certain like identity and environment, but how does it all merges together? It creates a sort of like Rojaki sort of environment, which is super poetic and beautiful in the same time, right?
Yeah. You're right.
Seeing a mosque next to a temple, next to a Hindu temple too, like like it's,
I do agree. Maybe at the end of the day, like looking at it like that, like it is not. You are comparing it wrongly to other places because of the very fact that it's not the same.
yeah, it's not the same.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
Also, we can't really erase where we are at right now. But what we can do is we can embrace like where our cityscape is, right, and look to the future and
Exactly.
how you would grow into that and embrace like what we have, as Malaysian.
I think
or the environment.
just having these kinds of conversations, just being like, okay, when people say, or even through the podcast saying, hey, what is the one thing that you can say about Malaysian identity or Malaysian aesthetics or Malaysian characteristics or behavior, and you can say something, it doesn't matter what, but if you say something like, it's Rojak, and we're having this conversation, it kind of enlightens other people to think about it like that as well.
Yeah.
Just the ability or just the criticality of things, being able to think about it.
Yeah.
is already a good step in
I guess
the
like
right
you
direction.
you need to have a certain positive mindset. Like Rojak shouldn't have a kind of negative connotation to the word. You
Yeah.
know, you should embrace the word Rojak. You know, then
Yeah.
with that, development will happen. You know, and change will happen. Yeah, positive thinking. I guess like
It is nice. Yeah.
Mm.
I hope to. I mean, yeah. I guess like the first step for us to reach that is just having these kinds of conversations first, lah. Like, obviously, if we are aware of it, then we can fully, utilize it
Yeah.
and develop from there.
Yeah.
If we keep not knowing things,
Yeah, because being pessimistic wouldn't change much, you know,
Yeah.
I would say. Like, but embracing, things and pushing forward, I think that will great development. Likewise, like you were prior to safe house, there's a certain kind of like I would say, on your end, you probably have that sort of desire to hold this space, So
yeah,
like,
yeah.
but also, pessimistic thinking would work as well because you'll be thinking like, oh shit, there's no space like that. Why? Then you yourself create it yourself,
Yeah.
like so. I guess there's a kind of yin yang balance to both of that too. Anyways,
No, it's
Yeah.
good. It's good. It's a nice. I don't know. It's a nice conversation to have. I don't think I talk about this with a lot of people. Definitely. Just interactions with space. I took one course on it, and I just like completely just. That's the way. From then on, that's just the way that I've approached thinking about spaces. Just being critical of how it is and how people interact with it, and I don't see a lot of Malaysians really understanding that concept and even being able to question why kadang-kadang like the blind people punya on the road, on the pavement,
Yeah.
the blind people punya
Yeah,
I don't know what they're called, the things where they put their sticks
Right.
and then after a certain time, because it's a different developer,
Oh,
it
then
just
that,
stops
yeah.
being
Yeah,
it
there's
just
no
stops.
like, yeah, you're
I
right.
don't think people question these things necessarily because it's just hard to wrap our heads around if you don't understand it in the first place.
Understood, yeah.
But okay, it was nice to really talk to you about that. And another thing that I do want to also have in this episode is basically the content of your exhibition and your recent.
So about face, the
Yes,
book behind?
about
Yeah?
face. I mean, I don't want to do a plug.
Okay.
Preferably not like plugging or something, but
Okay,
really
yeah.
just talk about what your intentions were and your objectives, what kind of questions you wanted to raise.
guess
Because it was held at the back room,
Yes.
and I didn't manage to go, but it was a bunch of things. Am I
Yeah.
correct?
Guess so, yeah.
There was a AI interaction with a computer.
Yeah.
Where people could use a computer.
Yeah.
There was a publication talking about the responses generated from the AI. Maybe you can explain this better.
I wouldn't say it's a solo exhibition, but more of a art exploration of myself, because I was questioning about the idea of like identities, right? Or like intellectual property of the identity of the digital, avatar. So, us as creative, when we get like, when we are creating something, it's based on our exposure and influences, over time, right? We get inspired by things around us, and over time that becomes who we are as a, creative identity, and we produce things that belongs to us, intellectual property wise. But what if the same way of how we learn, how we create can be recreated using I guess a digital like neural brain, right? So, we trained this neural like robot we curated a selection of texts, her name is Skylar Ang, and we told her like, hey, I want you to read this body of text, based on a technology called generative pre-transformer. But I guess a poetic way to say is like, hey, I'll feed you this bunch of like storybooks, and right now Skylar Ang, which is a AI bot, I want you to go out and make your own identity. So we are feeding the data set or the influence, But that's how humans learn anyway, And she builds her own identity, and right now you can talk to her, you can type in any question, she will reply to you, or she will even tell a story to you. But the question lies in like, who does that body of text belong to? Does it belong to me, the God that created her? Or does it belong to her, Skylar Ang as a, I don't know how to describe AI.
But I think
being,
it's a little bit different, just a footnote, right? Like you say, humans learn similarly, but
I mean,
but no one's really feeding us a data set.
We are getting exposed to it, but
we are doing that based on our own
preferencing,
decisions and intuition in life, you know.
Yeah, you're right.
And that's more of a you give a piece of paper, they read the piece of paper, and then
But you never know, like us in what is reality, you
Okay,
question things like that. What's
okay,
reality, and
that's become like
whether we are
spiritual.
even in like no, like whether we are in a simulation too, because
yeah.
us as human, we are always trying to create, I guess, like that perfect AI and robot to archive what humanity is, right?
Yeah.
We are trying to create a robot that speak like us, that behave like us, and things like that. We are playing God, at the time being, right? It's crazy,
it's a spiritual question, I think.
but yeah. But yeah, so I mean, the whole exhibition is all about the idea of like digital identities and like digital questioning. We are very much in this kind of media fad, like filter bubble. Like we are all kind of like the world that we are in is being curated for us from the things that we read online. So
Yeah.
like there's a kind of like duality and this sort of meta-ness in that. The robot that I created is also curating the content for my world.
Yeah.
So my world is getting smaller, smaller, and smaller.
Your freedom to decide
Yeah,
also.
yeah. So it's that that I find quite fun as a question. So I seeked out for friends and family and like to give like I guess a response to this idea of the digital identity and digital now, and that came out to I guess the book
Yeah.
phase.
How
that talks about it.
was it interpreted and received by the people that were like visiting and the exhibition?
Yeah.
I mean, I want to know how people interact because if to
Yeah.
me it's a non-traditional body of work. It's not just a painting. It's also
Yeah.
a bunch of other things that
Yeah.
accompany each other that generally ask questions in tandem with one another. Going back to the first comments about how galleries should be and artworks should be and stuff
Yeah.
like that. How did your non-traditional concept and body of work was received, and how was it interpreted and interacted with the people that came to see it?
Honestly, I don't know how people think of the work, but I think I have a certain observation. I think
Yeah.
like people are mainly quite engaged by the idea of that AI. It's like, hey, wow, this some Skylar Ann can actually speak and hold a language, and things like that.
Yeah.
In a kind of, I guess it's not done a lot where you take a AI and kind of recontextualize it into a art or creative platform. So it's quite refreshing, I would say. And actually, thought about something like the most engaging one was like during the phase of the exhibition, there was like I think 2 monks, like Buddhist monk that came over. I have a photo of it, which is quite amazing. They were typing in and questioning Skylar Ang about
How did they get there in the first place?
I guess like the question of transcendence and like God and like who created us and things like that. But it's quite funny to see that somebody that's very much in the world of like believing a certain religion, right? Questioning a robot about what is God, like it's like wow, it's
surreal.
Yeah, it's quite surreal, and you start thinking about like the idea of what digital shamanism and digital like digital like.
So generally, you would say people understood it from the get go, and then got the idea.
I don't think everyone understood fragments of it, but like for me, like there's no kind of conclusion and like I guess like an argumentation to it. It's just me sparking conversation and trying to learn what people think of it, right? So just absorbing as an artist more than learning more than showing something. I would say.
You kind of approached it more like an also a social experiment.
Yeah, I guess like an
to
exploration to see what people think of it.
What kind of conversations come.
And also, what I really like as well, because we actually documented the conversation that took place right. For a period of a week time, and we kind of you can see patterns as well what people have been asking the robot, which is quite interesting. Like some conversation came out like you also capture the moment in time. Some are very pessimistic, like some talks about like how should I kill myself even, like what, like crazy. But some some are really fun. Talks about should I buy Gucci or Prada, things like that. So it's fun to witness that through, I guess, like not the artist eye, but like
the people side
robot,
the
robot's
side.
eye, like and see what the robot answer them, and it's very kind of experiential, I would say. Like, and
Yeah.
it's quite nice that everyone that went to the show took something out of it differently, because the narration is different. You know, upon entering the show, you key in something, and the story that generate out is very personal to you. You know, and your experience should be quite different as well. You know,
Yeah.
and it also goes with the video art piece. So the way they perceive the video art are quite different down to what story Skylar Ang decide to tell. Of, you know,
That's. I mean, yeah. I think that is quite interesting to hear that, like, it kind of, there was some sort of interaction. There's some sort of criticality, and you'd be like, oh, what? It kind of was able to spark these conversations.
understood, yeah.
I think trying out new methods and being a little bit out of the box
Yeah.
assisted with that. If I go do crazy painting and whatnot, and then, but it's still a painting, and put it at a gallery, and then it might not spark any conversation at all, because at the end of the day, it's still a painting. But maybe the method that you also provided the art.
I guess it's the idea of sparking conversation, right? You go to the exhibition, for a start, you're sparking conversation with the robot, right?
Right.
But in the same time, you walk into the video art room, the robot is speaking to you as well and narrating above you. So he's telling you a story. But upon leaving the space, you take a book, and the exhibition is sparking its own conversation, So the book kind of, dissect through different, kind of like fragments of the digital now, right? Digital death, digital identity, digital, etc., etc. So, upon reading the book, it sparked even more conversation. I think that's the idea. Like me receiving, like, or learning from those conversations, but in the same time, it's also sparking conversation elsewhere, So it's quite nice that an exhibition can do that, I would say.
Yeah, I think it is quite nice that an exhibition can do that here also in Malaysia, I do think maybe I do see it a little bit more pessimistically than you are seeing it,
You're
but
so negative.
me, if I'm so negative, I wouldn't be doing this shit, man.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
I would not spend like every week doing a podcast talking about the arts industry and podcasts too, not like a 10-minute quick bites on YouTube.
Yeah.
But it's okay. I do enjoy talking to people, and I do enjoy talking to artists, people behind the scene, people who provide the platform, just the community in general, because there's a lot of perspective and a lot of outlooks that are different from one another, like you and mine. I think are already quite evident that we see things a little bit differently, but there's a nice conversation to have, because we are being critical and just talking about it. And I want to, like, encourage people to really just be able to talk about art in general. So I think we've hit the 1 hour mark. So thank you very much for joining me for this week.
Thank you.
Thank everyone for tuning in to Save Us You Presents Mulut Murai. I'll see you guys next week.
See you. Bye.